It was Christmas Eve, the kind you see in picture-perfect holiday movies. Gentle snowflakes drifting lazily onto rooftops, twinkling lights wrapped around the porch, and the cozy scent of cinnamon lingering in the air. But inside our home, the warmth was replaced by an icy tension, one that seemed to freeze every breath I took. Standing at the doorway, my hand trembling on the cold brass handle, I stared into the eyes of people who had once meant everything to me, my own family. Their expressions weren't full of holiday cheer or loving warmth, but an unsettling mix of guilt, anger, and silent accusation. My heart was racing, pounding in my ears, as the painful words my mother had just spoken echoed relentlessly through my mind. You owe your sister more than your future. Outside, the snow now felt bitter, rather than beautiful, each flake stinging like tiny shards of betrayal against my skin. I took one last look back into the house, at the twinkling lights now mocking me, at the family who had chosen someone else's mistakes over my dreams. And I stepped out into the cold night, not knowing if I'd ever return. Growing up, everything appeared picture perfect to outsiders, looking in on our quaint suburban life. From the freshly painted white fence to the meticulous garden beds that bloomed in spring, our house was the embodiment of the American dream. But beneath the polished exterior, invisible cracks began forming early on, subtle enough to ignore until they weren't. My sister was always the shining star, the charismatic, beautiful firstborn who effortlessly captured everyone's attention. Teachers adored her, neighbors praised her, and my parents? They worshipped the ground she walked on. She had a gift for charming people, for making them believe she was destined for greatness, even when reality told a different story. Meanwhile, I existed quietly in her shadow. Achievements that meant everything to me were met with mild smiles and polite nods, quickly overshadowed by my sister's newest venture, which often ended in financial or personal chaos. Every mistake she made seemed to deepen my parents' determination to fix her problems, no matter the cost. Year after year, this dynamic only intensified. My sister's glamorous facade grew more elaborate and more expensive. Every unpaid bill, every disastrous investment became a family secret, carefully swept under the rug. As she continued down a path of glittering disaster, my parents' desperation to maintain appearances grew increasingly frantic. Money intended for family vacations, college funds, even basic necessities, disappeared quietly into her debts. Inside me, resentment began to fester, but I buried it deep. There were rare moments, though, when reality couldn't be ignored, like the quiet dinners after yet another bill collector's call, or the tense glances exchanged between my parents when the mail arrived. I wanted to speak up, to shout about how unfair it all was, but every protest felt muted, smothered by the crushing weight of familial loyalty. I tried desperately to hold on to hope, to believe that someday my family would acknowledge the truth. That stability was more important than image, that honesty mattered more than perfection. But that Christmas Eve, as the snow settled softly over our perfect suburban home, all hope finally shattered. Reality crashed through like a brutal storm, exposing every hidden flaw, every painful secret we'd spent years hiding. In that moment, I finally understood. The perfect family image my parents fought so hard to preserve was never meant to include me. It all unraveled on a seemingly ordinary afternoon. One of those days where sunlight streamed softly through my bedroom window, promising warmth and comfort. I was sorting through college acceptance letters, the kind every teenager dreams of receiving. My future felt close enough to touch, full of possibility and excitement. Then, my phone buzzed, an alert from our family's shared bank account. Confused, I opened the notification, expecting a routine balance update, maybe even good news. Extra funds for tuition, perhaps. But instead, the screen flashed red. A series of numbers. A message I couldn't immediately process. Heart pounding, I scrolled through the transaction history, disbelief tightening its grip around me. Thousands of dollars. Gone. Withdrawals labeled vaguely as personal transfers and unfamiliar company names glared back at me, accusingly. Then, my eyes locked on the largest transaction, a transfer that matched, exactly, my tuition fund. I rushed downstairs, the proof glowing on my screen. I confronted my parents, their calm, dismissive faces, almost worse than the missing money. "We had no choice," my mother whispered, avoiding my eyes. "Your sister needed it." It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal that sliced deepest, colder than any financial loss could ever feel. Standing there, clutching the phone that held evidence of my stolen dreams, something within me snapped. Trust shattered, irreparably, leaving nothing behind but empty promises and haunting silence echoing in its wake. That night, the house felt different, like a familiar place suddenly turned hostile. Every creak in the floorboards echoed loudly, whispering reminders of betrayal. Upstairs, in the silence of my room, I carefully packed a bag. My movements slow, deliberate. Every item I chose was heavy with meaning. A worn notebook filled with dreams scribbled hastily at midnight. A small stash of hidden cash, saved painstakingly from my weekend jobs. And a photograph from happier days when smiles weren't masks. My heart ached as I zipped up the bag, each tooth sealing away pieces of my past. I glanced around, realizing this room, my sanctuary, had become just another shadowy corner of the perfect facade my parents desperately maintained. Leaving felt like severing a part of myself, but staying meant sacrificing what was left of my dignity. Silently, I tiptoed through the hallway, each step taking me further away from the life I knew. Passing my parents' closed door, I paused, briefly, fighting the urge to burst in, to demand answers, apologies. But deep down, I knew there were none left to give. Their choices spoke louder than any words ever could. At the front door, I hesitated, breathing deeply as fear and determination battled within me. Finally, pulling my coat tight against the chill, I stepped onto the porch. Behind me, the soft click of the door sounded more final than anything I'd ever experienced. As I walked away into the frozen darkness, uncertainty gripped me. But also, for the first time, a faint, fragile glimmer of freedom flickered inside my chest. I had imagined freedom would feel lighter, liberating, exhilarating. Instead, stepping onto the streets that Christmas night felt more like falling into a void. The glow of street lamps blurred softly through tears, guiding me nowhere in particular. Every breath I took created clouds of vapor in the bitter cold, each exhale a visible reminder of my isolation. Eventually, I reached my car, parked quietly on an empty street corner. Sliding inside, I locked the doors quickly, as though the thin metal could somehow shield me from the reality I'd just fled. My fingers were stiff, almost numb from the cold, but I couldn't bring myself to start the engine yet. Silence wrapped around me, a heavy blanket smothering my racing thoughts. Looking out through the frosted windshield, the city felt vast, indifferent. Lights flickered warmly in distant windows. Behind each one, a story, perhaps happier than mine. A wave of loneliness hit me, hard, making it difficult to breathe. I pulled my coat tighter, trying, unsuccessfully, to find comfort in its shallow warmth. Hours passed. Exhaustion began to blur the edges of my panic. Curled up awkwardly in the cramped back seat, I drifted into an uneasy sleep, haunted by dreams filled with echoes of whispered accusations and icy glares. When dawn finally broke, pale and uncertain, I awoke sore, disoriented. And with painful clarity, I realized the first night of freedom had given me little more than bitter cold and a stark introduction to reality. Reality hit hard the moment I stepped into the workplace. From sunrise to sunset, each day blurred into an exhausting marathon. Waiting tables at a crowded diner, stocking shelves in dimly lit convenience stores, cleaning offices after everyone else had gone home. The hours were endless. The paychecks, painfully small, each barely enough to keep the gas tank filled and the stomach fed. My feet throbbed constantly, worn raw from standing all day in cheap shoes. My hands grew rough from scrubbing stubborn stains late at night, long after others had drifted into comfortable sleep. Each task I completed felt like climbing uphill through quicksand, sinking slowly beneath the weight of exhaustion and loneliness. Yet, despite the fatigue, giving up wasn't an option. Every shift was another step away from dependence and toward something resembling control, no matter how elusive it seemed. Moments of brief kindness from customers felt like rays of sunshine piercing through dense clouds, small reminders that humanity still existed, even if I often felt invisible. But kindness wasn't the norm. Bosses barked orders sharply. Coworkers avoided eye contact. Each payday brought the stark realization just how thin the line was between survival and desperation. My reality had narrowed to a fragile balance of relentless work, aching muscles, and sleepless nights, filled with anxiety about bills I wasn't sure I could cover. Each morning, as I dragged myself from the brief refuge of my car, determination wrestled with despair. I knew this wasn't the life I had dreamed of, but every weary step forward reminded me that resilience was born not in ease, but in the gritty struggle of simply holding on. When life feels unbearably heavy, it's natural to seek comfort in friendships. And for a moment, it seemed I'd found just that. She was friendly, funny. She knew exactly what to say after a long, exhausting shift. Our late-night talks at the diner over lukewarm coffee and stale pastries offered a sliver of relief from my relentless routine. For the first time in months, I felt a genuine connection, like someone finally understood. One evening, she suggested we rent a modest apartment together, something affordable, a small step toward stability. Hopeful excitement bubbled up inside me, drowning out my cautious instincts. Finally, I'd have a place to call home. I withdrew nearly every cent I'd managed to save, painfully earned tips, and overtime wages stuffed carefully into an envelope. Trustingly, I handed her the money. I pictured a new beginning, a shared refuge from loneliness. But days passed. She grew distant. Calls went unanswered. Messages unread. A sickening dread twisted tighter with each silence-filled hour. Then, like a cruel joke, the truth came. The apartment was never real. My friend, my confidant, had vanished into thin air, along with every penny I'd worked so hard to save. sitting alone in my car, hands trembling uncontrollably, betrayal ripped through me again, sharp and familiar. Tears blurred the harsh lights of passing cars, each one indifferent to my devastation. The loss of money stung, but the loss of trust sliced even deeper, reopening wounds I thought had started to heal. That night, as darkness pressed heavily around me, a cold realization settled in my chest. Survival meant trusting no one. Friendship had become just another luxury I couldn't afford. There's a particular kind of silence you only hear when you've hit absolute rock bottom. A heavy, suffocating quiet that settles around you like fog. Thick, impenetrable. Alone in my car, parked beneath the dim flicker of a broken street lamp, that silence was deafening. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavier than I'd ever imagined possible. Every shred of hope I desperately clung to had slipped through my fingers, leaving behind nothing but emptiness and regret. The cold crept into my bones, but it wasn't the chill of winter. It was something deeper, something colder, coming from within. Tears flowed freely now, streaking my cheeks, warm against frozen skin, bitter reminders of each betrayal, each disappointment I'd foolishly tried to outrun. My breath came in shallow gasps as the panic of uncertainty tightened around my chest. Questions stormed my mind, relentless, cruel. Where would I go from here? Who could I trust? Did I even have the strength left to keep fighting? In that moment, everything felt hopeless. The distant sounds of cars seemed worlds away, utterly disconnected from the isolation gripping my heart. I curled tighter in the back seat, hugging myself as though I could hold the broken pieces together by sheer force of will. Yet, buried beneath the pain and despair, a tiny voice whispered faintly, barely audible, yet stubbornly persistent. It reminded me I'd already survived more than I ever thought possible. Even in the darkness of my lowest moment, something inside me refused to let go completely. As the night dragged slowly on, that fragile whisper became the only thing I had left to cling to. The faint promise that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would bring enough strength to face another day. Sometimes, when you're convinced all hope is lost, life finds the most unexpected way to remind you it's still worth fighting for. For me, that reminder came on an ordinary Tuesday morning, in a crowded community center, filled with chatter and the comforting aroma of brewing coffee. I was sitting alone, clutching a worn newspaper filled with job listings I'd already read 100 times, when a gentle voice startled me from my thoughts. An older woman with kind eyes and a warm smile asked softly if I needed help. Her voice held no judgment, only compassion, genuine and simple. Something about her presence instantly loosened the tight grip of anxiety that had become my constant companion. She introduced herself as a counselor at the center, someone dedicated to helping people find their footing again. Skeptical yet desperate, I listened as she described free courses on managing finances, career planning, and rebuilding trust in oneself. Her words slowly ignited a tiny spark inside me, fragile yet stubbornly bright. Walking into the center that morning, I'd felt utterly defeated, convinced I was beyond help. But now, in the warmth of her encouragement, something shifted. I realized this chance encounter might be more than coincidence. It could be the lifeline I'd unknowingly waited for. Leaving the community center that afternoon, the heavy burden I'd carried so long felt just a little lighter. Nothing had changed overnight. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like forever, hope was something I could hold on to again. Day by day, step by careful step, I began navigating the tangled world of personal finance. At first, every lesson felt overwhelming. Budgets, savings, investments, all foreign languages that seemed impossible to master. But slowly, I began to understand. Numbers that once terrified me started making sense, falling neatly into place like pieces of a puzzle I'd never known existed. Each evening, under the dim glow of a desk lamp, I pored over notes from the classes at the community center, pages filled with budgeting plans, emergency fund strategies, and debt repayment methods, gradually transformed from daunting tasks into achievable goals. The counselor's patient voice echoed gently in my mind, reinforcing lessons that weren't just about money, but also about self-worth and resilience. With newfound determination, I opened my first savings account, a tiny milestone, but one that felt incredibly significant. Watching those small deposits grow week by week wasn't just rewarding, it was healing. Every dollar represented more than money. It symbolized regaining control over a life that had felt helplessly adrift. Managing finances was about more than mere survival. It was about reclaiming power, independence, dignity. For the first time, I saw clearly how financial security could change everything, not just providing stability, but restoring confidence, self-respect, and even hope. Each carefully saved dollar, each meticulously planned expense, became a silent declaration. My past didn't have to define my future. I was finally stepping out of the shadows of betrayal and uncertainty, steadily moving toward a brighter, stronger version of myself. Months passed, and slowly but surely, hard work began paying off. It wasn't flashy or grand. It was quiet, steady progress, the kind that builds foundations sturdy enough to withstand storms. One morning, my supervisor pulled me aside after my shift, a stern look on his face. My heart dropped, expecting criticism, but instead, a rare smile broke his usual grim expression. "You've been noticed," he said gruffly, handing me an envelope. Inside, an official letter of promotion, recognition for endless hours of unseen labor, sleepless nights, and sacrifices I'd begun to believe would never matter. My hand shook. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes as I thanked him softly. That evening, sitting alone in my modest but cozy apartment, I allowed myself to celebrate quietly. The tiny space, filled with secondhand furniture carefully chosen, paid for through meticulous saving, felt more like home than anywhere had in a very long time. Each item around me wasn't just a possession. It was proof of survival, evidence of resilience. As I framed the promotion letter and placed it carefully on the shelf, pride swelled within me, warm, comforting. This was more than just a piece of paper. It was validation that my journey, every painful step, every setback overcome, was worth something real and tangible. For the first time since that fateful Christmas Eve, I saw clearly how far I'd come. The past would always linger, but it no longer defined me. Standing there in my own small sanctuary, success didn't feel like riches or fame. It felt like strength, earned through perseverance, determination, and an unwavering belief in myself. The knock on the door came late, too late to be casual, too urgent to ignore. My heart skipped, anxiety creeping back instantly. Slowly approaching the door, each step felt heavy, echoing uncertainty. Peering cautiously through the peephole, a familiar figure stood under the dim porch light. Wrapped in an expensive coat that now looked worn and frayed. My sister. Opening the door, the cold night air rushed inside, sharp and invasive. She stood there, pale-faced, shadows beneath eyes that once sparkled effortlessly. Her proud posture diminished, replaced by a quiet desperation I'd never seen before. "Can we talk?" Her voice was softer, smaller than I remembered, tinged with shame and fear. Hesitantly, I stepped aside, letting her into my sanctuary, a place she'd never visited before. She glanced around, visibly surprised at the simplicity. Awkward silence stretched between us, painfully long, until finally her words tumbled out, rushed, as if afraid she'd lose her courage. "Everything's gone," she confessed, eyes filling with tears. "Our parents, they lost everything trying to save me again. I'm drowning, and I don't know who else to ask." Listening, my emotions churned violently, resentment battling compassion, hurt mixing with reluctant empathy. Seeing her so broken, pleading for help, triggered memories of every betrayal, every selfish choice she'd made. Yet, in her vulnerability, she felt achingly familiar, a reflection of the girl I'd idolized long ago. In the dim lamplight, the distance between us felt immense, yet heartbreakingly small. My mind raced. The past I'd worked so hard to escape had unexpectedly found me again, forcing me to face the hardest decision I'd ever have to make. We sat across from each other. The silence stretched thin between us, like glass about to shatter. The cozy room, once my escape, now felt smaller. Every word unsaid pressed in from the walls. She fidgeted with her sleeves, searching for the right thing to say. But I spoke first. My voice trembled, not from fear, but from years of holding everything in. "You hurt me more than you'll ever understand. Not just once, not just with the money, but every single time you were saved, while I was forgotten." The words spilled out in a rush, raw, unfiltered. Each sentence was a wound torn open, bleeding into the space between us. She listened, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't interrupt. For once, she didn't defend herself. She simply absorbed it. Every accusation, every truth I had buried deep. There was no dramatic apology, no magical moment of healing, just honesty. Painful, necessary honesty. I didn't expect her to fix the past, and she didn't try. What she did offer was something unexpected. Accountability. "I failed you," she whispered, voice breaking. "I failed all of us." And in that moment, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not quite. But a loosening of the bitterness that had wrapped around my chest like barbed wire. I realized confronting her wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming the voice I'd lost, the worth I had been taught to question. It wasn't closure, but it was clarity. And sometimes that's even more powerful. They reached out weeks later. It started with voicemail, short, almost robotic, like it had taken them hours to record just 30 seconds. Then came the letter, handwritten, shaky, as if the pen had been too heavy to hold. Inside were words I never thought I'd see. Not apologies exactly, but cracks in their pride. The first real signs that maybe, just maybe, they finally saw the damage. They talked about sleepless nights, about watching everything unravel after I left, about losing more than money, about losing me. I read it over and over, as if searching for some secret message tucked between the lines. Part of me wanted to scream, "Now you care?" But another part, the quieter part, understood. Regret is a slow teacher. Some people only learn when everything else is gone. We met for coffee in a quiet spot. No fanfare, no expectations. just people sitting across from each other, trying to fill a silence too old to be healed in one sitting. They looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but emotionally, like life had finally humbled them. They didn't beg, they didn't blame. For once, they just listened. And though I didn't say much, I allowed myself to be heard. That was enough. I didn't forgive them. Not entirely. Not yet. But I saw the shift, the recognition. And sometimes that's where healing begins. Not with a perfect apology, but with finally being seen after years of being invisible. Healing didn't come in a big wave. It arrived in tiny ripples. The first was walking into a group therapy session, sitting in a circle with strangers who felt oddly familiar in their brokenness. No one tried to fix anything. We just shared, quietly, honestly. And for the first time, I didn't feel like my pain needed to be justified. I learned that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning how to live without letting the wound control you. Some days I left those sessions feeling lighter, like something heavy had been lifted. Other days I walked out crying, my heart cracked open again. But I kept going, because there was something sacred in being seen without judgment. I also started journaling, pouring every thought onto paper: rage, sadness, doubt, hope. It was messy, unfiltered, but it became my mirror. Through those pages, I began to understand myself better, to stop blaming myself for other people's choices, to recognize how strong I'd become, not because I was never broken, but because I kept choosing to rebuild. It wasn't linear. There were setbacks, days I wanted to give up, nights I felt alone all over again. But the difference now was I didn't run from it. I sat with it. I allowed myself to feel it all and let it pass. Bit by bit, I began trusting again, not blindly, but with discernment. And most importantly, I began trusting myself, my instincts, my worth. Healing isn't a destination, it's a practice. And I was finally practicing it. For real, on my own terms. The apartment stayed quiet most nights, peaceful, but not empty. I had plants now. Small, leafy things I'd never thought I'd care about. Their growth reminded me of my own. Slow, sometimes unnoticed, but steady. Bills were paid on time. Groceries filled the fridge. I even had a favorite coffee mug. All signs of a life that once felt impossible. But even in that stability, doubt lingered. It crept in when things got too quiet, or when a letter with no return address arrived. It whispered questions late at night. Was it okay to feel safe now? Was it selfish not to look back? Was I really healed, or just hiding better? The truth is, recovery doesn't come with guarantees. You can build a new life, brick by brick, and still carry the weight of the past in your pocket. And that's okay, because some scars don't need to vanish to prove you've healed. Some stay to remind you of what you've endured. I kept my boundaries firm. I reached out when I chose to, not out of guilt. I said no without apology. I smiled more, but only when I meant it. And still, there were nights I laid awake, wondering what forgiveness really meant. Whether it was something I owed, or something I'd already given, quietly, by simply moving forward. Stability didn't mean I had all the answers. It just meant I had enough strength to keep asking the hard questions, and enough self-worth to know I deserved the time to figure them out. She never asked for forgiveness outright. That might have been easier. Instead, she asked for help. Again. Said she'd learned. Said she was sorry. But sorry doesn't refill empty bank accounts. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I spent in a car while she lived under a roof built with my future. And there I was, standing at the crossroads. Not a metaphorical one, an actual intersection, walking home after work when her message came through. Her voice trembled over the phone, not with manipulation this time, but with something that sounded like genuine fear. I stared at the streetlight overhead, blinking steadily, like it was keeping time for me to make a choice. The part of me that remembered every broken promise wanted to hang up and never look back. But the other part, the part that still loved her in some deep, reluctant way, hesitated. What do we owe the people who've hurt us? Nothing. Or everything. Because once upon a time, they were part of us. That night, I didn't give her money. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. I offered something different, boundaries, a meeting place, a cup of coffee in a public space, a conversation, not a rescue. Because the truth is, my healing didn't make me responsible for her redemption. I could care without caring. I could listen without fixing. I could be present without being pulled back into a life I'd fought so hard to grow beyond. In the end, the decision wasn't about her. It was about me, about who I was now, stronger, wiser, and finally, free to choose what love looked like, on my terms, not theirs. People talk about choosing yourself like it's this empowering, glamorous thing, like it comes with fireworks and a motivational soundtrack. But the truth? Choosing yourself often feels like grief. It feels like letting go of a version of life you once held on to with every fiber of your being. I remember walking home that night after the coffee meeting. The city buzzed around me, but everything felt muted, like I was underwater, hearing life from a distance. I'd kept my promise to meet. I listened. I stayed grounded. But when she asked again, this time softer, sadder, I didn't flinch. I didn't bend. I can't fix this for you, I told her, and I won't lose myself trying. Her eyes didn't fight me like they used to. There was no begging, no guilt, just understanding, maybe for the first time. She nodded, and in that tiny gesture, I saw it, acceptance. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't triumphant. It hurt. It still hurts. But I walked away with my spine straight. My heart, though heavy, stayed intact. Back in my apartment, I stood in front of the mirror. Same reflection, same face. But everything felt different. For once, I wasn't waiting for approval, or forgiveness, or closure. I wasn't hoping someone would finally love me the way I deserved. I already was. Every scar on my soul had become part of the architecture, woven into something sturdy, something I'd built with trembling hands and quiet defiance. I didn't need to be rescued anymore. I didn't need to explain why I said no. I chose myself, not out of bitterness, but out of love. The kind that doesn't scream, or chase, or beg to be seen. The kind that stays rooted, even when everything else tries to pull it away. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real freedom feels like. If you've ever had to walk away from people you love to protect the person you're becoming, then this story was for you. Healing isn't easy. Choosing yourself isn't always loud, but it's always powerful. I want to hear from you. Have you ever made a decision that changed your life, even if no one understood it? Share your story in the comments. Let's build a space where survival isn't just quiet strength. It's celebrated. And if this resonated with you, give it a like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because more stories like this deserve to be heard. And maybe, Yours is next.